This is Coffee, Country, and Cody.
Welcome to our new home. Welcome in here as you watch us this morning and now join us on television, CircleCountry.com. You can watch us there or link to your favorite streaming platform from there. Charlie Mattos, producer, he's making his nest over there. You getting used to things?
I need a few more twigs and worms, but I'm getting there.
Okay.
I have fallen out of the nest several times, but I think I'll still be able to fly.
Everybody knows what I'm talking about when you say at work, depending on your workspace, you make a nest. Mm-hmm. And once that nest is disturbed, like you no longer have a nest and you have to go somewhere else.
Right.
Which is what we had to do when we left the
Yes.
Magnolia lobby after 40 years. And I'd been in there for 30 of them. Mm-hmm. You'd been in there for, what, 20 of them?
Yeah, correct.
Mm-hmm. And then we come over here to Mr. Acuff's house, which interestingly, is, just so you know, it's also a part of the tours. When you take a Grand Ole Opry tour now, you'll get to tour our facility here at the Acuff house. But today in 1948, he announced his intention to run for governor of Tennessee. I was talking about this a little bit earlier. And he would buy big blocks of time. I want to say 15, 30-minute blocks of time. And he would address the audience listening to WSM about his gubernatorial plans. And it's I'm sure you can probably find that stuff if you dig it on, do a little deep dive on the World Wide Web. You can find Roy Acuff running for governor. Let's see, who's making news this morning? Keith Urban is making news. Miranda Lambert. Sarah Evans has announced her Christmas show. We'll talk about those things along the way. Kelly Sutton with The Morning Off. I said, what are you doing? And she said, I'm taking my dog to the vet, but he is such a mess when he goes to the vet. We have to medicate him hours before.
Oh, it's a two-person job. She can't take him to the vet by herself.
And then they put him completely under.
Right.
And
this is just, they're not doing surgery. They're like clipping his nails and brushing his teeth.
Yeah. And he's getting a haircut.
Yeah.
So
sounds like a pleasant situation.
Maybe you should have just sent Paul and come on to work.
Yeah.
Might have been easier that way. We're going to rewind to the stage of the Grand Ole Opry when Ann Wilson performed Rain in the Rear View. That's coming up. And very excited, my artist, as I call him, Randy Hart, pianist at the Grand Ole Opry Musician Spotlight Sunday, Country Music Hall of Fame. He'll be in the Ford Theater there at the Hall of Fame Museum at 1 o'clock. And his special guest, Gary Burr, Micah Roberts, who's a background vocalist at the Grand Ole Opry, many, many years on the road with Toby Keith. I understand she's going to be doing the medallion, one of the background singers at the medallion ceremony this year for the Country Music Hall of Fame in the fall. And Charlie McCoy, who's already in the Country Music Hall of Fame. And we'll take them all around and go, this is what it's like when you're in the Hall of Fame. See, they put your picture up on the wall, you get a plaque here in the rotunda. I notice none of you have one. Nice to be with you. I'm Charlie McCoy. Randy was in the middle of a story about the song you just heard when I said, hey, we're going hot, man. Hang on. Hold on to that. It's Randy Hart on Coffee, Country, and Cody. Roger Miller. And Roger, so much a part of your life. What, 8 years as his band leader?
Yes. Yep. 8 years.
You audition? Or he just call you and say you got the gig?
Kind of both. It was, I got a call from a friend of mine that what had happened is Roger's band had almost all left to go with Glenn Campbell. Glenn was working more than Roger was working, and it made sense for them. So one of the fellows was left, Craig Fall, who I knew, and he called me and he said, hey, we're looking for a piano player. Can you come on down to Roger's house? He and Mary lived in Beverly Hills at the time. So I drove down there from where I lived in the mountains.
So you didn't live in Beverly Hills. You lived in
No, I was not
an
in Beverly
adjacent
Hills.
community.
I'm still shopping. And so anyway, I went down there and played, and it became obvious that okay, yeah, good. Now we've got a gig in 2 weeks in Las Vegas, and I lived in a house. My house only had electric heat, it was wintertime, so when you turn the heat on, the electric meter went. And so I said, want to come to Vegas? I said, done. I'm there.
So that was your first gig with Roger Miller?
That was my first gig. It was Roger and...
Where'd you play?
A Las Vegas Hilton.
Okay.
And Colonel Tom came down while we were there because
No
he was
way.
living there. He came down. And I had just started with Roger, and he started talking to me. He said, you know what Roger should do is a live album from here. And Oh, okay.
And did he?
No, he didn't. But the fact that Colonel Tom
yeah.
came down and,
And what
even
year-
acknowledged me, I thought, wow.
What year would this have been, Randy? roughly?
78.
Oh, so just after Elvis's passing.
January 78.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because that building was so synonymous with, Elvis from like 69 to 77, right? Yeah.
right.
Wow.
So that was his residency?
That he did a few in Lake Tahoe, but it was the International when it first opened, and
That's right.
then the Las Vegas
And then
Hilton.
it was the Hilton.
Yeah, and had that iconic kind of curved shape
Yeah.
to it, three-sided the curve, and that magnificent billboard when you first drove in.
And so when I drove up and saw that, I thought, boy, I have, this is the big time. And I was in Roger pretty much took me through my 20s. And so I was in my young 20s then.
That's an education.
Oh, yes. PhD.
Do you know that one of the most, if not the most photographed spot in Vegas is on Frank Sinatra Boulevard as you're coming in? That old Art Deco sign, neon, that is synonymous with a lot of postcards.
Yes, I know where
everybody
you're
knows it.
talking
You can
about.
visualize it.
Yeah.
I mean, people are there around the clock taking pictures in front of that to this day. And it's not a park or anything. People have just kind of created
Oh,
this
no,
little
it's that-
mini traffic jam right
It's
there.
that iconic. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I never got to meet Roger, never got to meet Robin Williams. And I think from all stories I've heard, their minds probably worked a little similarly. The closest thing I can even come to it is kind of the mind of Larry Gatlin, who I find brilliant in so many ways. But what was Roger like? Just as a guy, just to hang, not to necessarily work with.
Well, even in downtimes, I mean, what you saw with Roger on stage, he loved to perform, and obviously he was as quick as they get. So take him out of that environment, and he'd be talking like this right now, and would still come up with those things. So not that he was trying to perform in
Right.
front of a small group of people, he was just like that.
But that brilliance just came out.
Yeah, just absolute brilliance.
I heard him say one time he grew up in Eric, Oklahoma, with a number of Native Americans in that part of the world, as you would imagine. And he said when they had the prom, it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. Just that kind of stuff. Waylon always said he was the quickest human being, no comparison.
Oh, absolutely.
That he was ever around.
You played Husbands and Wives.
Yeah, go back to that
Going
story,
into
that line.
The line, it's my belief, pride is the chief cause and the decline in the number of husbands and wives. The first time I heard that, because I had to learn it, and I was learning a lot of Roger's songs that I hadn't heard, and that I had to pull off the highway almost. And so when I finally met him and we got to talking, I said, how did that come about? I mean, that's a one line, that's got to be a record for a one-line chorus or release, whatever you want to call it. And he said, well, I'd been up for, 2 or 3 days. And we don't need to go there. But so that's what it took. I said, well, then what did you do? He said, I slept for a little bit. But the record, the song, everything is, you're talking about perfect recordings. To me, that's one of them. It's just perfect.
And then Ronnie Dunn comes along, and with Brooks and Dunn, they re-release it decades later. And you said Mary, his wife, approved.
Oh, she loved it.
Yeah.
Still talks about that. Yeah.
Well, Randy Hart is here. These stories and so much more as a part of the Musician Spotlight. You're at the Country Music Hall of Fame on Sunday at 1 o'clock.
I am.
And tell us what that's like.
Well, I've done it one time before, and I learned when they were even talking to me about it, you've got 45 minutes. And I thought, well, what am I going to say for 45? I'm not going to play. And then I did this and play something. Not going to do that. So I called on the first time around, I had Mandy Barnett and Steve Warner come in and I won't say help me, bail me out more like. And so I did the same thing this time. I'm going to have dear friends which you always hear people say, and this is my dear friend, but they really are. One is a new dear friend, which is Charlie McCoy. Charlie's going to come, and we're going to play a song, just he and I, and Micah Roberts, one of our singers.
Yeah, and with Toby Keith for years and years.
Was with Toby for over 20 years, and just like anybody, all of us virtually in the Opry Band or the Opry singers, we all have been doing this long enough. We have the ability to play a whole wide variety of genres, and sometimes that's exhibited at the Opry. So the first time I heard Micah sing, it was a Broadway-ish type song that she was doing as a demo for a friend of mine. I heard that and I thought, my God, I had no idea that she could do this. So we're going to do a surprise song. I can't tell you what it is.
Oh, I'm excited to
find
out when it finally happens.
Yeah. Then Gary Burr is going to be there as well, and Gary's going to sing his song that is now on Kenny. Help me.
Chesney?
Thank you.
Okay. Well, I was going to say Rogers, but he doesn't have any new records out lately, so I went with Chesney.
That's a cup and a half of coffee
Okay.
instead of two. I'll blame that. So anyway, a song that he and Mike Reed wrote, which is extraordinary. And then we're going to do I Try to Think About Elvis, which is going to be Charlie's going to take the solo, Micah and I are going to sing backgrounds, and Gary will be playing and singing. So, yeah, it's going to hopefully that, and I know that 45 minutes just flies by. So,
Gary Burr, singer, songwriter, novelist.
Author, that's right.
Yes, he has a new book. He's coming to see us to talk about it, too. It's about, it's fiction. But,
Yes.
Called Reunion, and it's a Beatles-based story.
It's a rock and roll fairy tale, the cover says. And I'm not going to tell him this, so don't anybody tell him. I haven't read it yet.
Oh, okay. I thought maybe you got an advance or something.
I did.
Oh. But you work a lot. You worked last night
Thank
at
you.
the Opry, and you're there. I'll be hosting tonight. We'll be together for Mandy Barnett, Beth Nielsen Chapman. Very excited to see that she's playing the Opry. Longtime friend, but I haven't seen her in a long time either. John Conley, Ashley Cook, Daly and Vincent, Tim Duggar, Chapel Hart. They're doing an amp after the show, and our Aaron Cooper will be hosting that. We'll sit down, visit, and live performance. Ashley McBride and William Lee and the Goldens, and it'll be the first time for the Goldens since the passing of Rusty Golden. Coffee, Country, and Cody with Randy Hart. One of those is the right one.
There were two.
Two of those were not the right one.
Listen, 333 gets you into the Baseball Hall of Fame, brother. I got 1 out of 3 right. Come on. If you just hit them all, one of them will be right.
We were with Randy Hart, extraordinary man. Musicians Spotlight Sunday at the Hall of Fame. It's in the Ford Theater at 1 o'clock. He'll be there with Gary Burr, Micah Roberts, and Charlie McCoy as his special guests. I'm going to throw out some names, people you've worked with through the years. We've talked about Roger Miller, who unbelievably was gone at 56.
Yeah.
It was lung cancer, wasn't it?
Yes.
Ultimately?
Yes.
He smoked heavily?
I don't know how heavily he did, but he smoked.
Yeah.
Enough.
Yeah, enough.
Right, yeah. And it's sobering. The older I get, the younger people seem to be when that happens. 56 seems very young to me. At one point, that would have seemed very old.
I've had that conversation with so many people. Yeah. I mean, cancer has become so prevalent.
Yeah. He talked about a smoking habit once, and we were talking about how quippy he was, and he actually wrote something once called "Dad Blames Something a Man Can't Quit."
Yeah, yeah.
So, Randy Hart is here. Steve Wariner, let's start there in this segment.
Steve, if it weren't for Steve, I probably wouldn't be at the Opry. There's a likelihood that I wouldn't, because the first time I played the Opry was with Steve, and for years I did it with him. Then I became the substitute piano player, and then now I've been doing that now for 10 years, 10 and a half years.
You've been there a decade, huh?
So if it weren't for Steve, I wouldn't be at the Opry. If it weren't for Steve, I wouldn't have a BMI plaque on my wall. If it weren't for Steve, I wouldn't have a Grammy plaque on my wall. If it weren't for Steve, you know, who knows?
How did you wind up working with him? Again, that kind of like the audition process? Or?
It was an audition process through friends. It's so long ago, frankly, I can't remember exactly the people that were involved, but I was able to get an audition. I knew they were looking for somebody, and they sent me some songs to learn. To do this audition was at Don Light's office a day or two before Thanksgiving, and it was Steve and Tony Brown and Don, and I sat down to Don's piano, which it was like playing a sponge. It wasn't very responsive, and so I played that, went home, and thought, okay, the phone's going to ring, and I waited and waited and waited, and. Longer than it felt, I'm sure, but then I was with Steve for 3.5 years and pitched him a couple of songs, which everybody still remembers. I think, I'm sure they do. The Weekend and Linda, and that got me off the road because I kind of got fake. Reputation for being, he could be a publisher. And so I became a publisher for a short period of time until they realized, he's a better musician than he is a publisher.
I love that.
So when you got the gig as the pianist at the Grand Ole Opry, who was there the first night you remember having your Opry debut?
Honestly, the only one I remember, I remember the group of people that would be there around that time, but the one I remember in particular was Gene Shepard.
Oh, yeah.
And Gene didn't like change, and I represented change.
She didn't mince words either.
No. But I grew to love her, and she was really something.
I want to ask you about our friend that we all love, Gary Mule Deer. You are featured in a really cool segment on Show Business Is My Life, But I Can't Prove It, the incredible documentary on Gary's 60-year career.
60 plus years, right?
Yeah, and he is going into the Comedy Hall of Fame in September. And that's just Lucille Ball, Richard Pryor, George Carlin.
Norman Lear.
Just a few of the folks in there. It's crazy.
Amazing.
Yeah, but you crossed paths with him for the first time because of Roger Miller, right?
I did. When we, on my early on, not too many months after the Las Vegas Hilton date, we had a residency, or it was a rotation at the Silverbird Hotel, which was on the Strip. It was right next to the Sahara, between the Sahara and the Riviera. And there were rotating comedians that would open the show. I forget if they do, 20 minutes, 25, whatever it was. And Gary was one of them. Harry Anderson was another one. Harry went on to star in his own show, Night Court, and unfortunately, as we were talking, passed very early. Hank Garcia, I think that's who it was. Anyway, Gary was the one that seemed to really make the most sense. Everybody was great. There's nothing to diminish what the other guys did, but Gary's, his delivery and his content of what he did just was a really good fit. So that's when I got to know Gary, because we'd be there for 2 weeks at a time, and
well, he's synonymous with Johnny Mathis these days. How did that happen?
I don't know, but I know, talking about time passing when you blink. He's been with Mathis now, I think, 25 years as his opener.
Wow. And actually, it's interesting you phrased it that way, because he's actually the middle.
That's right. That's right.
Because Johnny will come out and do like 40 minutes, and then Gary will come out for a half hour, and then Johnny will come back again.
Yeah,
it's an interesting, and he loved. I asked Gary, I said, "Is it weird?" He goes, "No, I love it.
Yeah.
I love it because they're already there and they're engaged. I'm not warming them up. I'm just continuing the magic." He goes, "I love that format."
Yeah,
so,
he does love it. But it was during that period of time that Gary and I really became friends, and then through the years that goes back. You mentioned earlier, you were saying Urban Cowboy was in 1980 as I was driving up. And I thought, my God, that's 44 years. And that's just about the time that I started with Roger and met Gary.
Was there any vestige of the Rat Pack at that point in time in Vegas?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think, Dean Martin was probably doing his NBC show. Frank, I don't know if they would still come and if it had kind of,
Waned a bit.
yeah, maybe, but I don't remember that being there. I remember actually when we were at the Silverbird, the Gatlins were next door at the Riv, and it was a different era.
You worked with Willie and Garth along the way, the Allman Brothers. Pick up those stories.
Well, depends on your definition of working with. It looks great on my bio. And it's not a lie. Willie was very close with Roger, and so Willie would show up from time to time at jobs. He did an Austin City Limits with us. And so there's a great, that show is still on YouTube like they all are. And Willie nods to me. I think we were doing Milk Cow Blues, and it's a classic. I'm in my 20s, and I'm thinking this is as good as it gets. Willie Nelson looks at me and nods. Take the solo. Allman Brothers, never met them. I got called to do background vocals for a record that they had to get out. I think contractually they had to have something released. It was after Greg had left, and it was in that period where he wasn't there. And so anyway, I went down to a studio. There's a studio in the Valley, San Fernando Valley, and we did that the same time that Fleetwood Mac was recording there.
Oh, wow.
And Mick Fleetwood's drums were set up with not just police tape, but I mean, there was no doubt that you didn't even get near that.
And that drum kit would not fit on our nice stage that you're sitting on this morning. It was so massive,
It
right?
was massive.
Yeah.
It was massive. So I did those vocals. Garth, only by virtue of the fact that, I kind of feigned association. It was success by association because Garth cut The River, which was written by Victoria Shaw, who was in the company that I was running songs with at the time, Gary Morris's company. The secretary was Faith Hill downstairs, so Faith would answer the phone, and Gary wanted the phone answered, just say music. So all day long I'd hear Faith say, music, and I'd run the songs. Had nothing to do with that except I got a great picture with picking up an ASCAP award with Garth. And we've seen each other through the years.
Randy Hart, a special friend, and again, the piano player at the Grand Ole Opry. He'll be there tonight's show.
And next time you visit, we'll have to talk about being on a Ringo Starr album, because that's going to be out real soon. And I know you and several members of our Opry Band.
That's a Gary Burr connection there, but you're right.
And the Musician Spotlight Sunday at the Country Music Hall of Fame and Museum, Ford Theater, 1 o'clock with Micah Roberts, Charlie McCoy, and you mentioned Gary Burr. We're going to close. Did you have a backstory on I Think About Elvis that you wanted to share before we played it?
I Think About Elvis we're going to do Sunday afternoon. Gary's going to play guitar and sing. Micah and I are going to do background vocals, and Charlie is going to play the solo. So, yep.
Patty, get it together. Was that spontaneous or was that on the demo? Or do you have any idea?
I never heard the demo. I really don't know.
I just wondered if it seems very spontaneous.
It was brilliant, whether it was or not. I don't know.
That's where we close. Randy, thanks so much for your friendship and for coming to see us. Congratulations on the Musician Spotlight.
Thank you very much.
Musician Spotlight at the Country Music Hall of Fame artist Randy Hart was with us earlier this morning, and he referenced a song called Milk Cow Blues that he did on Austin City Limits with his boss man, Roger Miller, who was guested by Willie Nelson on that particular episode of the show. And that felt a lot like Milk Cow Blues and Bob Wills and the Texas Playboys to me. Welcome, Kayla Ray, to Coffee, Country, and Cody.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I love all that swing stuff, so I appreciate you saying
I saw that. Yeah. It says a native of Waco, baptized to the tune of Bob Wills and Tanya Tucker. She can recite Merle's deep cuts without missing a beat, and as a kid, she often tuned into the Grand Ole Opry with her grandfather, who built a makeshift antenna to ensure the family picked up WSM AM radio from faraway Nashville, Tennessee. How far away did Nashville seem to a little girl in Waco?
It felt like a very far, very, very, very far distance, I will say. Yeah, it was just at least over the hill, you know. But yeah, my grandfather, we could have, you know, I mean, we could have easily just tuned in with our regular radio, but he was just an engineer and a brilliant mind, and he wanted us to have the experiences of turning knobs and flipping switches and things lighting up, and it was all in our living room. It was a big deal, you know. They grew up that way, and they wanted us to have that as well, and I'm really glad for it. It was special, you know.
Kayla, I'm old enough I can remember if the antenna wasn't working right for the TV, sometimes you wrapped aluminum foil around it, and that kind of helped a little bit too. Now, sometimes it made it much worse, but you never knew what the equation was going to be. So,
Sure.
yeah.
Well, give us your backstory, your family. What did they do as a kid growing up in Waco?
I was raised predominantly with my grandparents. My grandmother was 4'11" and Chickasaw Indian, and my grandfather was 6'3" and Scotch Irish. So our house was very interesting often, you know. But they were wonderful. I mentioned my grandfather. When he retired, he worked for Baylor University as part of their engineering department. But he didn't start that way. He was working at Syntex Ironworks, and our local high school needed a shop teacher, and he got that job. They paid for him to finish his first degree, and he just kind of worked his way up. He worked the high school and then a technical institute and retired at Baylor. So he was a great example of working hard and continuing to grow. And they were just great. They were wonderful.
You say the name or the phrase shop teacher, and I can see Mr. Browning right now immediately. Shop. You don't hear that much anymore.
Sure.
People don't take shop. But you'd have your regular classes in the first part of the day, and you'd take shop in the afternoon, and you'd do all those auto mechanics things. And so thanks for that trip back in time.
Yeah, sure. It's sad it's no longer a part, I guess. I didn't really, maybe I took that for granted growing up. I never really thought about it.
And I'm sure
you know?
it still exists in some parts of the country, but I just hadn't heard it in a long time. Kayla Ray is our special guest. Well, your friendship with Aaron Enderlin is what brought about the introduction to Coffee, Country, and Cody. You obviously met her somewhere along the way in your transition to Nashville.
I did. I met her about 7 years ago. We were playing on a round together in Lukenbach, Texas, and kind of became fast friends. You know, we figured,
Hondo Crouch's place.
That's right. If you meet there, you're kind of stuck. You know, so we've toured
Well, I
together.
just lived
off and
over
on.
the hill in Comfort for many years.
Oh
Yeah.
wow, I know exactly where that is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have to go welfare to Comfort. You know
Isn't
that,
that
right?
great?
You go through welfare, and then you arrive in Comfort. And you leave Comfort, and you go past my house on Flat Rock Creek Road, and you come out in Sistadale. You make a left. Next stop, Lukenbach. You pass the grain bins, you've gone too far.
Okay.
You missed the loop.
It's
'Cause
easy to miss,
It's
too.
the
It
Lukenbach
is.
loop. It's
Yeah.
off the main highway, and if you make the loop, it'll bring you right back in. Maybe, a half mile down the road, you
Yeah,
come
maybe.
back out.
Yeah, and that's it. It'll spit you right back out. Todd Snyder talks about getting lost because people take the sign too for their garage.
I was
you
just
know,
going to
'cause-
say, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but we met there. We toured together off and on through the years just because we really enjoy it. And she's been kind of begging, you know, like coaxing me to move here for quite some time. I'll come stick my toe in, play, and then get back out and get back to traveling. When I moved in September, I had a chance to work with some people on this record, and I really love it so far.
So tell us about the record, the making of the full album, which is available now. I saw where it said pre-save on your website, but it is out, came out in early June. Charlie mentioned, I think, the 7th or something like that.
Yes, sir.
And it's called The World's Weight.
Yep, it was actually a crowdfunded project. I recorded it with my friend, we call him Nooch, in Oklahoma City. And it was kind of, I was really, really lucky to have it.
Is he the drummer, Nooch?
He is a drummer. Yeah, Giovanni Carnuccio
Yes,
III.
yes. And how I know him is through, he was just in the studio.
It may have been Edie. It may have been
Jason Edie,
Yeah.
and he is in some of his videos, live performance videos, playing
Right.
the drums. And I asked him, I said, who is that cool-looking cat
Yeah.
back there on the drums? And he said, oh, that's Nooch. And then he gave
Yeah.
us, what's his full name?
Giovanni Carnuccio III.
Well, we were talking off the air. You and Jason Eady have a long musical history together, right?
We do. Yes, sir. That was my first road gig. I tour managed for Edie for 3 years while I was kind of writing my first record and learning how all of it worked, you know, and it was like the first traveling gig that I saw out of Waco, so I hopped in, you know, and I was like 20, you know, and I was managing, all this grown group of dudes, but we traveled all over, and he really showed me that there was an independent market. There was a way out. If I wanted to work hard and get a shovel, I could find my way out. So I traveled with him for 3 years, and he produced my first 2 records. And then after that, I started touring independently, and we still work together pretty often. I saw him when he was here. I tuned in, actually, when he was on y'all's show. So.
Well, was that the first time you really got to go out and explore America?
Oh, yeah. And it was like everything was the coolest. Every gas station, every truck stop, everything was awesome. I remember going to Tulsa, and it was like, I'm by God somewhere, like I'm so far from home.
Did you guys do Cain's Ballroom?
He did work that, but the first one was the Mercury Lounge, which is a cool little vibey spot.
Yeah.
But I worked for him when I think he opened for Jason Boland. Again, this has been 10 years ago, so at Cain's, I think was the show that we did there, which was a legendary spot.
It is interesting, though, because I love seeing America. I got to travel with Vanderbilt for 29 years, and I swear I've seen 90% of the country doing that.
Sure.
You either fall in love with it or you know exactly this is not what you want. But when it bites you, when you got bit, there's no getting around it. That's what you want to do.
You're correct.
Yeah.
I am just stuck with it. I think, I've got a van and a little frizzy dog, and I've hired a tour manager. I've done it alone a long time. But it's just a blast. I sleep in it as often as I can, see as much as I can,
Where was that first gig with Jason? Do you remember?
The first show that I worked with him, it probably was a place called the Wild Turkey Bar in Cuero, Texas, way down south.
Oh, I know where Cuero is.
Yeah. And I remember it was fall.
And Cuero's mascot is the high school mascot. They're the Gobblers, hence the name Wild Turkey, I bet.
I'm sure. All I remember is that the Gobblers were playing at home that Friday night, and nobody came to our gig. Is what I remember.
It was Friday Night Lights in Texas.
That's right. Yeah, but that was one of the first, if not the very first. Yeah.
Where would you have performed early as a kid growing up? Do you remember any specific moments in time where it's like, oh, that's the first time I did, at church or in the community somewhere?
I did grow up singing in church. We had a cool little band. They were honky-tonk players on Saturday night and our church band on Sunday, so that was cool. But the first paying gig I ever had was at Papa Joe's, where Billy Joe Shaver shot that guy in the mouth.
Oh, yeah.
It was the closest place to my house with my grandparents. It was 6 miles down Moonlight Drive, and I remember they advertised in the paper that they had. It was like a live open mic with their house band, the Honky Tonk Heroes, and I'd been storing up classic country songs for all of my life. I was just like waiting for the moment that I was old enough to vote and go to the closest bar, And so I kind of started working in that room, and eventually they started hiring me to come play.
Well, they wouldn't let Billy Joe speak at his trial, so he brought in character witness Robert Duvall to speak on his behalf, among others. But apparently at some point he yelled out, I told you he shot at me first.
Yeah.
Which, according to witnesses, didn't happen, which is even better. I love it.
But I don't know if that's a good defense or not.
I agree, right. Yeah, it's fair.
Even if it is true.
Their story back home is that there are 2 bathrooms and they're one hole. There's very, very small bathrooms, and they were friends. So Billy shot a guy named Billy, and so they were all friends with both Billys. And when the cops came, they wanted to know, like, have you seen anything? And 43 people were in those tiny bathrooms. Nobody saw it. There was nothing to be said. So I love that spot. I still play it. It's really the only place around home I play anymore. When I go home, I always play at Papa Joe's.
Well, you referenced your grandfather working at Baylor earlier. Did you ever attend Baylor?
Oh, no, that was far too rich for my blood. They wouldn't have had me. They're too straight-laced, I think. But I did go to school. I'm still in school. I'm in graduate school right now. I've been traveling and just kind of staying at it because I like to keep my brain working. But the first time I went to college was at the community college. They had a commercial music program. I was referred to that by Tommy Alsop. I met him at total random. But Dick Gimble, Johnny Gimble's son, was a big part of my experience there. He really, really equipped me. He and his wife were just here. They came and stayed 2 nights with me here in Nashville.
How about that?
Yeah. So I went through their commercial music management program because I wanted to understand how it worked,
Last time I saw and visited with them was when Johnny went into the Country Music Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
And they came to the luncheon.
I believe that. They're wonderful.
Oh, yeah. The World's Weight. Kayla Ray, thank you so much for coming to see us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Tell me a little about that guitar you're playing, because that song has that Willie Nelson ballad feel to it, and I notice you're playing a classical guitar like Trigger.
Yeah, thanks. I did not make it this ugly all by myself. I got it on the I paid $60 for this guitar.
Oh, did you? No
I
kidding.
did. I got it on the Goodwill auction site. But when I was making this record, I really wanted that rich tone. And everybody talks about Willie doing it. But if you look at music through the 60s, Haggard would play a gut string from time to time. Roger Miller played a gut string often. Bobby Gentry, there's a lot of Glenn Campbell stuff. I just wanted that thing. And a friend of mine had one. He paid $40 for his. But he brought it to the session, and we tracked with it. And I just was enamored with it. So I found one of my very own. Put some, a new pickup in it.
What's your favorite Tanya Tucker song? I know you're a big fan of hers from your childhood.
Oh, man. She was like my first favorite. That's hard to say, really. Maybe it's that David Allan Coe thing, Would You Lay With Me in a Field of Stone?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
The early stuff from her.
Yeah, I mean.
And also, we referenced Waco, and in reading your bio, I saw where Hank Thompson figured prominently in your childhood listening because of your grandmother. Mm-hmm. She was crazy about him, right?
She was. Yeah, we saw him one time. She kept a 45 off a jukebox that she says she wore out alone of The Wild Side of Life, and we saw him years later. I mean, I was an early teenager, and he was playing the Horseshoe in Gatesville, Texas, and she shuffled up to him and took his, her little record, and he signed it, and they were just precious. But, I mean, I loved it. I grew up on every bit of that.
Well, thank you for sharing it with us this morning on Coffee, Country, and Cody. Kayla Ray and the brand new album available wherever you get your music. It is there. It's called The World's Weight. You got to hear the title track just a second ago.